All right, welcome everyone. So it's obviously with great pleasure that we welcome you yet again to another ELS-Partners webinar. I'll start here with just giving you a quick introduction of the team. So you have first Mark Lefebvre, who will be our presenter today. Mark is a senior partner here at ELS and is an enterprise lean agile coach and business transformation expert with well over 20 years of experience leading, coaching, and mentoring teams at all levels of the organization. Next, we have Waleed Asafan. Waleed is also a senior partner here at ELS with over 20 years of agile coaching and business transformation experience. And finally, myself, Chantel Hunter. I just want to welcome you once again. And I'm a CPA by trade, specializing in sales and marketing operations. And my main goal here at ELS is to drive engagement and promote our mission. Our mission is to help organizations embrace change, reduce time to market, improve quality, and increase employee engagement. We achieve this by helping organizations transform through expert agile guidance, empowering teams to deliver exceptional value while creating fulfilling workplace environments where innovation thrives and people reach their full potential. Today, our goal is to walk you through the epic and feature life cycle in agile delivery. Please feel free to write down any questions that you might have in the chat, and we'll monitor it and try to answer the questions as best we can throughout. But we are also always going to leave some time at the end for some Q&A. So yeah, with that, I'll just pass it over to Mark to begin our presentation.
Sure. Thank you, Chantal. So let's make this a little bit more conversational, actually. So this type of topic is great with some input and some insights from the participants. So feel free to chime in if you've got any questions. When I have my slides up, I can't necessarily see everyone if anyone's raising their hand or something. So I'll rely on Waleed to let me know if there's any questions. So context for this chat. So this topic was selected because it's one of the most common conversations I have with the arts that's come up over the years. One sec here. There. See the screen now?
Yeah.
Yeah, very, very common topic that's come up with most of the arts I've worked with over the years, even down to the team level and even at the epic level, at the portfolio level. So I thought it'd be a good idea to make this a webinar topic and present some of the common solutions, common approaches for dealing with this, and see if there's any questions from the audience. So let's first level set on the two types of work items we're going to be talking about, epics and features. So let's just make sure, I'm sure everyone's got a pretty good idea of what these are, but let's just level set to make sure we're all on the same page. So epics are those big strategic initiatives, right? The things that the work initiatives, similar project, but we don't use the term project, of course, in Agile. Work that spans multiple months, even a year or more, right? So they represent large bodies of work, long-term, align with long-term business objectives. If you're using concepts or approaches like SAFe, these will span multiple PIs and that sort of thing. Right, so these need to, of course, undergo rigorous analysis to validate their impacts on those strategic themes. So an example that we give here, launch a blockchain based on payment system, a blockchain-based payment system by, say, Q4 2025. So something like this might be an epic requiring 3 to 6 program increments or planning intervals, whatever, however you're calling them, right, or multiple quarters, if you will. Those epics typically get broken down into features, right? So these are the more customer-centric deliverables. So features is more of a discrete product or capability that's going to deliver immediate user value, right? Typically completed, depending on your definition of done, within the time frame of a PI or a quarter, if you will. Right? So these PIs, if you're not familiar with SAFe, periods that last anywhere from 8 to 12 weeks. Sometimes they follow the quarterly cycle. Features themselves, they decompose the epics into actionable units, actual units of value that get delivered to end users typically. Sometimes they can just deliver some of the capabilities and the underlying platforms or architecture needed to launch future functional features. So unlike epics, features are managed at what we call the program or art level, and they're validated or executed through or get broken down even further into user stories, the things that the teams will actually complete. So is that clear? Is there any questions about those types of work items?
Yeah, Mark, I would like to interject here. I've seen in the industry that a lot of organizations try to be creative with those names. So I've worked in organizations where features are the big ones and the epics are the smaller ones. I've seen organizations call epics initiatives and then they have features in those. So like for the context of our presentation today, epics is the bigger one, features is the smaller one that sits above the stories. And typically epics are quarter or more in length, and features are quarter or less in length. Again, this is typical. It's not like a rigid rule.
Indeed. All right, thanks for clarifying that. So for the purposes of this discussion, like you said, epics are the big things, features are the smaller things. So let's just talk about the workflow for any of these types of work items at a high level, what's typically tends to happen, right? And we typically, of course, manage these things on Kanban boards. My next slides will get us into those Kanban boards and the specific workflows. But at a high level, what typically happens, right? So there's usually the starting point is usually what's called the funnel, where the ideation happens. This is where we capture the high level ideas from strategic themes, either market shifts or from customer feedback, right? Those are the sources of the work. And here we're going to draft, in the case of epics, lean business cases outlining a hypothesis, what we expect this value to, the impact we expect this value to have, what the return on investments expected to be. And ideally, you carve out a minimum viable product scope, right? So what's the first thing we're going to deliver to validate if our hypothesis is correct? So that's usually the funnel stage. Next is reviewing and analysis. So from all the possible things that we could be doing, what are the things we want to focus on first? And let's do some analysis as to what resources are going to be needed, an estimate on the cost, time frames, and that sort of thing. So whoever needs to participate in that level of analysis, we bring them in and decide what to work on. Is there a comment? Right, so to do this, you're going to conduct epic workshops or backlog grooming sessions, whatever the case may be, whatever those types of events are called. Typically, we'll define as well some acceptance criteria, right? How do we know when this thing is complete, or what things have to be true for this thing to be considered done? Then you'll have your implementation step or your execution step. It's called different things in different organizations, of course. So these epics decompose into features, which then, of course, are further refined into user stories typically. Example we give here, enhance mobile app security, or becomes features like implement the biometric authentication part of that, and then also deliver encrypt in-app transactions. So this is the build-up phase. There's all kinds of different levels of testing that could happen here, whatever the case may be. And once everything checks out, all the tests pass, there's no more problems anymore, we can release this thing and get some feedback, right? So we're going to, in the context, again, of safe, we'll do those system demos at the end of the PI, validate everything is working. We have feature completeness, and then get this into the hands of end users so we can get that all important feedback. There could be staged releases, for instance. It could go out to free customers first to get that feedback, make sure everything's working before releasing to everybody. There's different strategies for getting that release out there. Okay, any questions about what happens at a high level here? All right, moving along. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of some of the challenges that types of questions and issues that have come up with the arts and the teams that I've worked with over the years. So the basic Kanban workflow for features. So we're going to focus on the features first, because more often than not in these agile transformations, we focus, it's usually bottom up, at least in my experience. Ideally, it's top down, but more often than not, it's the bottom up implementation. So this is where a lot of the discussions tend to happen. Typical workflow here for features differs a little bit from epics, which I'll show next. But and this could be different, and of course different work environments. Even within an organization, different arts might have their own versions of this workflow. But this is a fairly standard one here, where again you got the funnel and then an analysis stage. When the analysis is complete and things are ready to be worked on, picked up by the art and the teams, they can reside in a ready column. Implementation happens next, or execution, or in development, whatever you want to call it there. Then there's typically some type of validation and a staging environment of some kind that resembles production. And then there's a deployment, which is separate from release typically, right? So deployment means let's get it into the right environment, make sure that everything's working. Usually we have features hidden under what we call feature toggles. And only once everything's validated there that the feature toggles are turned on and we make it available to end users. And then we can consider things done. Seems simple, but what are the types of challenges that we run into? The main questions that tend to come up is, who does what and when? Who's responsible for maintaining the status of the features through all these things? Those are one of the biggest questions that come up. This can be because of uncertainty about the roles and responsibilities. People are in these transformations, people are moving from roles like product manager into scrum master or RTE. Analysts are moving into like product owners or product managers, that sort of thing. So sometimes it's unclear as to who's supposed to do what and when. Another challenge is people sometimes are wearing too many hats. Right? Some people have, in these early stages, are taking on more than one role. There could just be unfamiliarity with the new process, or lack of process defined around testing, deployment, and that sort of thing. Other challenges that typically happen is just too much work in progress and lack of clarity around what the priorities are supposed to be. So one thing I always highly recommend, one solution that I've found that solves a lot of problems, and this is not something that's even talked about in the SAFe training or SAFe materials, is in addition to definition of done, most people are familiar with, my definition of done. How do you know when things are complete? Should also have a definition of ready, right? So this is something I've always promoted and made sure that the arts include in their process, is to have a definition of ready. So that alone answers a lot of questions, right? How do we, and so it solves a lot of problems about exactly what's expected when that's handed over to the teams for building. Making sure that it has the right level of information, very, very important, very key. So these two first columns refer to as pre-planning, right? So this usually in SAFe and other Agile at scale methodologies and frameworks, there's usually a big planning event of some kind. So the inputs into your big planning event is features that meet the definition of ready, have all the information, and have been prioritized and estimated, and made sure that the amount of work that's been planned will fit into the team's capacity for doing work. There's a whole separate webinar we've done and blog posts about that tactic. So pre-PI planning, very important. And when this happens, so this is where it kind of overlaps. The people involved in the pre-PI planning and the planning stages are doing their work usually when the teams and the arts are in the process of executing, of building, of developing, right? So during a PI, teams are developing, the people doing the planning are hard at work doing the analysis, prepping the work for the things that will be done in the subsequent PIs. And this is where the teams and the arts differ as to how they use this Kanban board for their workflow. Let me see if I can get some drawing tools going here. I've seen this column, the ready column, used different ways. Sometimes it's included in the planning stages, right? Something's done from the analysis stage, it goes into ready. Or they have the ready column split, right? So things that are ready to go, but aren't selected for an upcoming PI, and the actual items selected for a PI are put into a different column. I've seen different ways of doing all of that, but typically implementation is its own thing. So as far as the life cycle of the feature is concerned, whatever definition of done you have may only extend to as far as this. Meaning within the time frame within that PI, teams can build the solution, build the functionality, test it to a certain degree, ensure that it's working, and that sort of thing. And maybe that's as far as they can take it, right? But within the time frame of the PI, they need the full life time frame of a PI, be it 10 or 12 weeks, to just get it to that stage. And so it's considered done as far as the art is concerned. And now there's a handoff. So whatever I got to turn off the drawing tool. Here we go. So there's execution and development during implementation, but if the team can only take things as far as testing validated within time frame of the PI, now has to be a handoff to whatever team is responsible for deployment and release. So that could be your DevOps process. That's typically referred to as the DevOps process. Those are responsible for delivering and getting new functionality into a stable production environment. I've seen some business owners, people who are responsible for the overall process, insist though that within the time frame of a PI, right, it should encompass all of these steps. So instead of having it end there, I've seen some business owners insist that we want, within the time frame of a PI, we want to release things all the way to production. Right? We want it's not considered done unless it's in the hands of a user somewhere. So that can be the case sometimes. What's the implications of that? Well, if that's to be the case, it has big implications onto the sizing of the features that happens during the planning, right, and the preparation stages for PI. It kind of forces you to have things smaller in scope so that they can be fully tested, fully vetted. If there's user acceptance testing required in there, people are going to need more time and to work on smaller versions of the features that go out. So depending on the expectations of business owners, there's different ways of approaching it. The most common one I've seen is only taking things as far as, and we might have some extra columns to represent this within the time frame of the PI, the testing validation of the functionality itself within the time frame of the PI. So if that's the case, you're going to add some columns here to show what happens within the time frame of the PI, and then have the other columns represents what happens when you've handed it off to the DevOps team. So this is where a lot of the negotiation happens with the resources who are responsible for developing, testing, and deploying the functionality. Other big challenges that have come into play with the arts I've worked with is, sometimes these teams who build the thing have some duties and responsibilities with regards to deploying into staging environments or testing environments, and even involved in, because they have the experts, are involved with deploying things in production and dealing with issues that might come up. So if that's the case, these are things that might happen, after a PI, meaning when and subsequent PIs are going to have to reserve some capacity for helping out and doing the testing and the deployment activities. So that kind of reduces the amount of work, capacity they have for building new things if they're involved in that deployment. Okay, any questions on these aspects? So, of course, have a definition of done. So the definition of done, and this is where teams can struggle with as well, is where it depends on where you draw that line. Right. So definition of done as far as the arts and the team's concerned is everything up until the handoff to DevOps. But if the teams are responsible for deploying all the way to production within the time frame of a PI, now your definition of done is going to have to be more encompassing. It'll have to include all of those deployment steps, right, and release steps. So varying levels of complexity in the definitions of done. There could be, versions of the definitions of done are called dev done, is a common term, and done, meaning once it's completely rolled out. It's all right. Last chance for questions on feature workflow. So with regards to the epics, we'll speak about this a little bit higher level. Challenges faced here. Again, there could be a lack of understanding about new roles and responsibilities. So who's doing what and when. And even in the case of the feature Kanban, we've got all of these policies and this is another thing that we as Agile coaches help the teams out with, is defining these policies. What happens at each stage of the workflow, and defining the details about the requirements for getting something into the column and the requirements for getting something pushed out of the column. So we'll do that at the feature level and at the epic level. Other challenges we face here when setting up a portfolio backlog for the first time in a portfolio Kanban in the workflow, lots of legacy processes and expectations that aren't necessarily compatible with lean ways of working, with agile ways of working. Very common problem I encounter is the unwillingness to manage work in progress. Right, so having too much work flowing through the system at the same time. I do my best as an instructor and coaching, transformation coach, to point out, if you're working on too many things at the same time, it's going to take much longer to have anything delivered versus the approach of thinking of single piece flow, like working on one, maybe two things at the same time, getting those done in very short order, and then moving on to the next thing. So working things on items more sequentially has a huge impact on throughput and getting value out the door. So a very big challenge there sometimes. Another big challenge here is the unwillingness to prioritize. Right? So the biggest complaint I've heard from the arts and the teams is that with all the potential things they could be doing, it's unclear what the priorities should be. And they have that lack of clarity from the portfolio level. So if the items that are coming through the Epic Kanban board aren't being prioritized, and there's a technique called weighted shortest job first, WSJF, which is a fantastic approach for prioritizing work items. I call it very objective way of ranking the items in your workload, in your backlog. So there has to be a willingness to prioritize things, and there has to be a willingness to manage the work in progress. Another important concept to make sure happens is don't put large things through the process. The batch size has a big impact on throughput. So it's very important to adopt that practice of instead of building the whole, trying to build the entire system, decide what the MVP is, the minimum viable product. Right? What's the smallest thing we can build that'll prove out whether or not this new solution that we're planning to roll out will have the intended effect. So very important to take on the MVP practice. No one in Epic can be released from portfolio governance. So things shouldn't sit in here forever, right? The implementing stage where things are being built out, it's usually separated into two columns, implementing MVP, right? So the focus on the MVP first. Once the MVP has been proven out and the rest of the functionality has been greenlit, we usually call that implementing persevere. But we don't, and whilst in persevere, that's when you continue to build out the functionality until most of the solution's been built. But it doesn't have to be in there forever. Like once it's in operations, there's refinements that are happening, adjustments to incremental changes that could happen to the solution. At some point, you don't really need portfolio management governance on that solution anymore, right? It's in the maintenance phase. That responsibility could easily be pushed off to the arts and to the teams, and it becomes a source of work for them, right? So the sources of work that goes into the art funnels is things that come from the portfolio. But other sources of work into the arts is simply the things I would call local sources, meaning whatever portfolio of applications the art is responsible for maintaining, that could be their source of work. So this doesn't necessarily come from the portfolio level. This comes from that list of applications that they're supporting and maintaining, as well as, other sources of work could just be the maintenance items, refactorings, technical debt, and that sort of thing. Another source of work could as well be collaborations with other arts. So these arts don't always operate in isolation. They're usually collaborating with other value streams, right, to get that they're dependent on or who are dependent on them. So again, similar challenges here. It's a little bit more straightforward as to how work flows through here, right? So it's funnel reviewing, analyzing. But again, very important to prioritize these things so that the arts have the context within which to prioritize their own work. Now, some of the reasons that I've encountered for why there's some reluctance to prioritize at the epic level, at the portfolio level, have been pretty varied. One place I worked at recently, it became very obvious that the reasons they weren't, so the epic owners weren't prioritizing their features was because they were afraid of having their pet project, their major initiatives, deprioritized versus other things, and they would have be forced to wait. So they didn't want to be willing participants in the prioritization process because they risk having their work postponed or put off. So that's where agile leadership needs to come into play, and the leaders, the organization leaders have to come in and more or less mandate, right? Nothing gets worked on, no funding gets approved until this prioritization has been done, because we can't do everything. We don't have the companies usually don't have the funds, and if you're sticking to the proper guardrails, you're allocating the funds appropriately, so it should be mandated. Okay, any questions here?
Mark, I have a question.
Sure.
Can you combine the timelines for the epics and the features? Like how do we add the features at what stage? And like in the previous slide, you showed that features can be inserted at any time. Does that mean the epic can continue to grow over time and never be done?
Very good question. So there's a couple of ways of addressing that. There's concept of investment horizons. So investment horizons is a strategy that lean portfolio management teams should employ, deciding what's the mix of items that should be in the backlog at the Epic backlog, meaning, and then there's 4 horizons. Let's see if I can remember. There's the innovation stage, right? So there should be a certain percentage of the portfolio budget allocated to innovative work. So investigation, what's the next big things we should be working on? What's the market directions and the demands from the clients and that sort of thing. So a certain percentage of the budget allocated to that. Certain part of the budget should be once items have been either greenlit to go forward or blocked. As you know, this was we're not pursuing this one anymore. We're dropping this one. So the ones that do make it to the next stage need that next level of analysis, that next level of planning, and some of that analysis work and prototyping and that sort of thing, for instance, may very well go into the backlogs of the arts to carry that out. Even if it's not value that ends up in the hands of an end user, it's more of exploratory type of stuff. And then once it gets to the next stage, this is where it's the operational stage. This is where, okay, we're actually going to build this out. This is what usually comprises the biggest part of the budget, right? When we're actually executing on something, building it out, releasing it, and adding incremental value to it as time goes on. It's in an operational state. And then the next stage of the investment horizons is decommissioning. So this is when things get too near end of life, and we're going to start phasing out one solution in favor of the next things that are coming in to replace it. So that's one way of, I think, answering your question. What's decides the mix of things that goes at the arts? That's one of the guidelines for that.
Thank you.
And again, that usually describes the type of work that comes from the portfolio level. But again, like I said before, at the operational stage, at some point, it becomes the responsibility of the art to manage that. So I had those points to make. I think I mentioned that. And again, depending on it's when we have those workshops to roll out and stand up the lean portfolio management teams. That's when we'll decide what the actual workflow should look like, what the columns in their Kanban board should be, what their definition of ready is for epics, and definitions of done. And keep in mind, the definition of done is going to be a little different here. In both cases, stuff that comes into the funnel and things that leave this depend on what we call the epic threshold. So the epic threshold is, depending on the size of the new initiative that comes in the funnel, usually they put some guidelines as to anything that's $2 million and above for budget requirements. That will be at the purview of the epic backlog of the epic workflow. Anything that's below that is not going to end up in the epic and the LPM governance. It'll only be taken up by one of the arts if it is something that needs to be done. Similarly, at the end of this process, at some point, once something is in operation, that should drop below the threshold for LPM governance as well. All throughout here, very important to, and we'll talk about this later, putting work in progress limits, right? So even the analysis stages, reviewing here or analyzing here, we need resources for doing that work. So even the analysis steps should have work in progress limits on them, right? And I see that arts and the portfolios making that mistake all the time. They think they could just pull as many things into analyzing as they want, and then again, things. That's a cause for a bottleneck for work, properly defined work not making its way to the arts. It's by taking on too much stuff in the early stages. So it's important to put work in progress limits there as well. All right, let's talk about the different roles and the responsibilities they have. So answering the question, who does what and when, this is the starting point. Ultimately, these people here, these roles, people have the ultimate responsibility. So who are these people? So at the Epic level, at the portfolio level, we're talking about the Epic owners. So the Epic owners, as the name implies, own the Epics until implementation, ensuring alignment with those strategic themes. And ultimately, they should be the ones with hands-on, right? They should have update the portfolio Kanban statuses, either the Epic owners themselves or, as often happens at that level, someone they designate, someone they delegate this work to. But ultimately, it sits with the Epic owner to ensure that this big new initiative that they championed and were able to get prioritized, make sure that its status is managed all throughout the process. For example, just moving something from analyzing to ready or implementing, even though a lot of that work is being carried out by other people, they should be managing that status. Down at the art level or at the team level, the ultimately responsibility of product managers to do the same thing for features. So since they're responsible for defining the features and prioritizing them, they should be managing the status on these Kanban boards as well. So whatever tool you're using, be it Jira or one of the other tools out there for managing your workflow, they should be hands-on with that tool and actually updating the status of these things. I've seen sometimes that gets delegated at the feature level as well. So once, for instance, they'll manage the status of things all the way up to PI planning or to the big room planning. So from portfolio, from funnel to analysis to ready, they'll manage the status then, and then maybe hand over that responsibility to product owners on the team level, maintain the status going forward, and then they'll hand over that responsibility to the DevOps team when it comes to deploying and releasing. But as a good starting point, I usually encourage the product management team, when I'm working with the product management team, to be involved and aware of what's happening at every stage of the game. So the question, if the question ever comes up, who's responsible for maintaining the status and moving things along in the process? My answer is product managers at the feature level, Epic owners at the portfolio level. From there, it can be a negotiation as to how that gets delegated, but ultimately the buck stops there. And then overseeing everything at the portfolio level, they have the LPM management team who they govern Epic flow, allocate the budgets, monitor value delivery, and that sort of thing. So they ensure that there's that strategic alignment across the portfolio in the organization, and that to optimize the resource allocation. So that's the answer I give when I'm coaching the teams at all levels as a starting point. And again, it usually ends up, especially after several iterations of the PIs, 2 or 3 years into the process, some refinement to all of this can happen. But it's good to start off with these key roles, managing those core responsibilities. Best practices we're providing here for optimizing flow, as I've been saying all along, limit that work in progress, has a bigger impact than you think it does. So if you don't currently have those WIP limits on your Kanban boards, very important flow accelerator to put in place is to put those work in progress limits in there. And then respecting, how much capacity each of the teams doing the analysis work and the ones doing the execution, respecting their sanity, it's good to have those work in progress limits there. Leverage lean portfolio management. Like I said, some of the biggest complaints I've heard come from the arts is that they're unsure about the priorities, what they should be focusing on. So making at the LPM level, it's important to have to align the epics with the organization's strategic themes, and review quarterly and have quarterly funding reviews to make sure that the priorities, because priorities can change from quarter to quarter. So it's important to review, what resources are needed to get to that next step, to that next stage. Again, using tools like weighted shortest job first to prioritize epics is very important. Again, very, very effective way at coming up with an objective sequencing based on the economic impacts of each of the items in the backlog. Very difficult to do. So the biggest challenge with doing WSGF prioritization is the first one is the hardest one, because nothing's been prioritized yet. So you have to prioritize everything. And that can be a daunting task to get through that first WSGF prioritization session. Sometimes it'll take several sessions. It becomes a lot easier once everything has a WSGF score associated with it, because now it's just refining the priorities going forward. So at each quarterly review or annual or biannual strategy reviews, now you're just prioritizing new things versus the stuff that's already in the ready column. So it could very well be that's something new coming in ends up with a higher WSGF score than something currently in your backlog, and we'll push that item back out further. But if that's what makes the most economic sense for the organization, then so be it. Some metrics for value delivery, and there's many. I'm only mentioning a couple here. Flow velocity is one of the most common one. So measures features delivered per PI to assess throughput. So you can measure the velocity at any on any Kanban board, but very important to do at the art levels, just so that you can know how much work the arts are capable of delivering every PI. Cycle time is important to know. So this tracks the average duration from epic ideation to feature release. And a very important one that I encourage all levels of planning to do is flow efficiency. So this looks at the ratio of total time spent in value-added work activities divided by the total flow time. Not too uncommon, especially in the early stages, to have a very, very low flow efficiency. And it's important to apply practices like flow engineering or value stream mapping to look at your whole process and see and measure the time it takes at each step, and more importantly, the wait times in between those steps, to find out where your bottlenecks are, to find out what's holding up the process, because, and as you know, in Lean and Agile, continuous improvement is always encouraged. So where are you going to put your improvement efforts? So you need insights into things like flow efficiency and value stream mapping to see where there's always one major constraint in every system. So you want to identify those key constraints throughout your process at every review stage, so that you know where you can focus your improvement efforts and where they'll have the biggest impact. So we offer services that help out with that type of thing. And there's many other different metrics that can be chosen. The guidance I always give there is be very, very deliberate about the metrics you choose, because putting the metrics together themselves is time consuming and requires effort. And each number that you put out there should tell a story. And if you're not telling the right story with your metrics, those numbers can be misleading and have negative impacts. So be very, very deliberate about the metrics you're choosing. All right, got a few more slides to go. So conclusions and next steps. Very important to establish portfolio Kanban and the LPM team. Again, it's ideal to, when you're doing a safe transformation or an agile transformation, to start with the leadership level and portfolio level, because that will give clarity to all the teams in the earth below. But more often than not, like, the senior leadership is saying, okay, we're going to try, we'll try this safe thing we'll have these teams over here give it a shot. So it usually ends up being bottom up. Very important to train your Epic owners. So I've put a lot of custom training sessions together to train our Epic owners so that they understand what should be happening at each stage, to understand those investment horizons and how to make sure they have a proper mix of things in their backlog, and that the right investments are going to the right proportion of investments are going to the right place. Integrate your flow metrics, include it in quarterly business reviews, and again, be very, very deliberate about the types of metrics that you're going to include there. Right. So it's easy to see that doing this right has a positive impact. There's all kinds of studies that have been shown, and organizations like IBM and Atlassian have reduced their time to market by 40% using these practices. And finally, for you, some resources for further learning. Right. So, of course, we've been mentioning SAFE all throughout this. It's our recommended approach for implementing Agile practices. And of course, you need to put your tools to best use for this thing. Jira being the most popular tool that we've come across, of course. Not a personal favorite of mine for a number of different reasons. So it's rare that I get the chance to advise on that direction. That tool decision is usually made well before I show up on the scene. So these resources provide a comprehensive support system for implementing the Epic and future lifecycle management that we've been discussing. But it's always good to have guidance from well-seasoned, well-experienced Agile coaches like myself and Walid to guide things along, because there can be a lot of confusion around how to implement these frameworks properly. And of course, there's additional training provided by SAFE partners like ourselves for how to set up lean portfolio management. All right, that's all I have for you today, folks. Any questions I could answer for you? Were there any questions submitted by anyone? Some clapping hands from Nora. All right. So hope that helped you out. Did that answer any questions that you had that didn't, even though you didn't ask me, that clarify anything for either of you there?
No questions from my side, Mark. Thank you for the presentation. Just here for the information.
Perfect.
Thanks.
All right. Well, I hope that helps. I know some people are waiting for the recording on this as well, so hopefully we'll see some questions come up. Feel free to reach out at any time if any questions do come up, or if you've shared this material with some of your coworkers and that sparks any questions. We're always available for a quick chat on any of these topics. All right. Any further comments?
Thank you, everyone. No. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Have a good day. Bye.
Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Bye-bye.
Bye.